Texas, 1944. The sun was barely up when the truck stopped outside Amarillo. The engines went quiet, and for a moment, all that could be heard was the wind and the soft rattle of dry grass. Inside the back of one truck sat 20 German women, nurses, clerks, and radio operators from the defeated Luftwaffe. Their uniforms were wrinkled, their faces gray with dust and fear. For weeks, they'd been moved across oceans and borders, told the same thing by guards and rumors alike. America was a nightmare. They'd be chained, starved, or worse. Some whispered that American soldiers shot prisoners on sight. Others swore their captured women were sent to work camps or never heard from again. When the truck doors opened, 24-year-old Lieselot Meinhardt braced herself for shouting and rifles. Instead, she saw a man in a tan hat and dusty boots. No helmet, no gun pointed at her. "Ma'am," he said softly, "watch your step." His voice carried a lazy drawl, so calm it felt unreal. Outside, the air smelled of hay, not smoke. Horses snorted nearby. A dog barked once and ran off into the heat haze. The sky stretched so wide it seemed to have no end. A kind of freedom that almost hurt to look at. Lieselot stepped down slowly, expecting a blow at any moment. But none came. The man in the hat handed her a tin cup filled with cold water. She hesitated, then drank. It was clean, crisp, the best thing she'd tasted in months. He smiled and said, "Plenty more where that came from." Behind her, the other women climbed out, blinking in disbelief. There were guards, yes, a few soldiers standing nearby with rifles slung loosely at their sides, but no barking dogs, no chains, no hatred. Only quiet efficiency. One of the Texans pointed toward a line of low wooden buildings beyond the fence. "You'll be staying there," he said. "Breakfast in an hour." Breakfast. The word barely made sense. Lieselot looked around, at the fences that didn't seem high enough to keep anyone in, at the men who seemed more like farmhands than guards, and whispered to the woman beside her, "This is America?" For 3 years, she had been told it was a land of greed and chaos. But here, under the open Texas sky, she saw something else entirely. A country so sure of itself that it didn't need to hate its enemies. That first morning in camp, the women waited for the cruelty to start. None of them spoke as American soldiers handed out metal trays and lined them up for breakfast. They braced for insults or thin soup. Instead, they got coffee, scrambled eggs, bread, and even apple pie. It looked like a joke, too generous to be real. One woman whispered that it might be poisoned. But hunger is stronger than fear. They ate in silence and waited to be punished. Nothing happened. Later, an officer came to explain the rules. He didn't shout. He spoke slow, in clear German. The United States, he said, followed the Geneva Convention. Prisoners would work, get paid, write letters, and be treated fairly. If they obeyed orders, they would be safe. The women stared at him, trying to understand the point of such an act. In their world, kindness from a victor didn't exist. America's approach wasn't built on mercy. It was built on order. By 1944, the U.S. was holding more than 400,000 prisoners of war, most of them German. The War Department had learned something simple. A prisoner who's well-fed, busy, and treated decently causes no trouble. Fewer guards, fewer escapes. But to the women, who'd grown up in a system where fear was law, this logic felt like compassion. Each day followed a rhythm. Roll call, meals, work details, mail delivery. They were allowed to attend church, use the library, and take English lessons. Medical care was provided by army doctors. The rations were the same as those given to American soldiers: beef, potatoes, bread, vegetables. Even coffee when supplies allowed. At night, the women wrote letters home. Most began the same way: "I am alive, do not worry." But what came next was harder to explain. They wanted to tell their families that they were being treated with respect, that guards said please and thank you, that no one yelled, that the food was good. But such words sounded impossible, even to them. When the letters were sent through Red Cross channels, most families refused to believe them. Back in Germany, people lived on rations and fear. The idea that prisoners were being treated with decency in America felt like fantasy. For the women in Texas, though, it was very real. The fear of the first days began to fade, replaced by something unfamiliar: curiosity. If this was how America treated its enemies, what did that say about everything they'd been told? By midsummer, the camp gates opened for a new kind of assignment. The women were told they'd be sent to work on nearby ranches. They imagined hard labor under armed watch, maybe even chains. But when the trucks stopped outside a wide stretch of land near Austin, what they saw looked like something out of a movie. Horses grazing, barns painted red, and men in denim shirts leaning on pickup trucks. Their new overseer wasn't a soldier. He was a rancher named Frank Callahan, tall, sunburned, with a grin that seemed impossible during wartime. "Morning, ladies," he said, tipping his hat. "You all ready to work?" The translator had to repeat the words twice before they believed him. The day started with breakfast: bacon, eggs, and coffee that could wake the dead. They ate at a long table while the ranch hands joked around them. No guards hovered nearby. When they finished, Frank clapped his hands once. "All right," he said, "let's get you riding." At first they thought he was joking. Riding? Prisoners? But minutes later, they stood by a corral full of saddled horses. The cowboys helped them up, laughing gently as skirts tangled and boots slipped. One woman screamed when her horse began to trot. Another froze in place, clinging to the reins. "Don't fight her," a cowboy said softly. "Just move with her." By noon, they were covered in dust and sweat, but something had changed. They were laughing. The fear that had followed them from Europe began to melt under the Texas sun. That night, after a long day of work, the women sat by a campfire with the ranch hands. Someone brought out a harmonica, another a guitar. The tune was familiar: Lily Marlene, a song every German soldier knew. Without thinking, one of the women began to sing. Then another joined in. Soon the voices blended, German and English, soft and warm in the night air. For a few minutes, there were no prisoners or guards, no sides, no war, just people, dust, and music under a sky full of stars. As the fire burned low, Frank said quietly, "War ends quicker when folks remember they're still people." The women didn't answer. They didn't know what to say. But inside, something settled. A quiet recognition that dignity could survive even here, in the middle of Texas, surrounded by strangers who refused to act like enemies. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch began to feel less like a prison and more like a small town with its own rhythm. The women worked hard, feeding animals, fixing fences, washing clothes, helping in the kitchen. There were no towers, no searchlights, just open land, windmills, and the steady hum of life. Frank Callahan made the rules simple. "You run," he said. "You'll die thirsty out there. You stay, you'll eat well and sleep easy." No one tried to escape. Why would they? Out here, surrounded by endless sky, they were trusted. For women who had spent their lives under orders, that trust felt unreal. The Cowboys treated them like new hands, not like prisoners. They joked, teased, and taught them how to throw hay bales, mend saddles, and rope calves. "Tougher than half the boys we've hired," one cowboy said, half proud, half amazed. Work wasn't punishment here. It was pride. They learned that in America, labor could be something to enjoy, not fear. One afternoon, a storm swept across the plains. The wind howled, lightning split the sky, and the cattle panicked. Without waiting for orders, the women grabbed ropes and joined the cowboys in the mud and rain, shouting, chasing, driving the herd back to safety. Hours later, soaked and shivering, they returned, exhausted but grinning. Not one animal lost. That night, Frank hammered up a hand-painted sign above their bunkhouse door, "The German Cowgirls." The women laughed until tears ran down their faces. For the first time since capture, they belonged somewhere. Evenings became something to look forward to. The ranch hands built fires, played music, and shared food. The women learned new words: howdy, y'all, partner. They tried Coca-Cola for the first time, wrinkling their noses at the sweetness, then asking for more. There was still war, still loss, but here, far from Europe, it seemed distant, like a dream fading in the heat. Lieselot wrote in her journal, "They treat us as people, not prisoners. It is madness, but also something better than reason. Maybe kindness disguised as madness." Under the wide Texas sky, boundaries blurred. The women no longer felt like enemies. They were workers, riders, and strangely, a little bit free. Spring, 1945. The air on the Texas plains smelled of rain and new grass. Rumors spread quietly through the ranch. The war in Europe was ending. One afternoon, Frank Callahan walked out of the barn holding a folded newspaper. He took off his hat and said simply, "It's over." For a moment, no one spoke. The German women stood still, their hands frozen around tools and ropes. Some cried. Others just stared at the ground. They should have felt relief, but all they felt was emptiness. The war had taken everything: homes, families, certainty. What did home even mean now? Frank poured coffee for everyone and said, "You'll be going back soon." The word back hit harder than the news itself. Back to what? Germany was in ruins. Yet there was no anger in his voice, no victory. Just quiet understanding. When the trucks came, the women packed the few things they owned: letters, gloves, a few trinkets. Frank walked up to Lieselot, handed her a small wrapped bundle, and said, "So you don't forget Texas." Inside was a cream-colored Stetson hat. She laughed through tears as the cowboys cheered and waved them goodbye. Months later, when she stepped off a ship in Germany, the sight was almost unbearable. The docks were rubble, the cities gray and silent. American soldiers handed out food parcels: chocolate, canned milk, soap. On each box was the Red Cross emblem. Lieselot held her hat close and whispered, "They were right. America is not what they said." She began working as a translator for the Allied forces, her English rough and full of Texas slang. When she said "ain't," officers smiled. In 1948, she spoke at a women's conference in Stuttgart. "Freedom," she said, "isn't something nations give. It's something people show, one act of kindness at a time." Years later, she moved back to Texas and opened a small bakery in San Antonio. Above the counter hung a photo of her younger self wearing the cowboy hat, standing beside Frank. The caption read, "From enemies to friends." Visitors often asked if the story was real. She would smile and say, "It was more than real. It was human." If you believe kindness can change history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out more stories that prove humanity always finds a way.